In today's video, I'm reviewing the new Juliana Furtado. Welcome to Dusty Betty. My name is Tess, and today I'm going to be bringing you guys a review of the Juliana Furtado. Juliana is a women's-specific line. It is the sister line to Santa Cruz bicycles. The Juliana Furtado has a long-standing reputation of being a fun, playful 27.5 trail bike. But this latest version is quite a departure from what we've come to know. For one thing, they've turned this bike into a mullet, which means instead of two 27.5 wheels, we've got the 27.5 in the back, but we've got that 29er in the front, which is going to make this bike a little more serious, but still a little bit playful with a smaller wheel in back. But this bike is longer, including the rear end. So we're going to get it out, we're going to talk about it and see if Juliana is able to bring some of these fun new characteristics they want to this bike without losing the spirit of what we've come to love from the Furtado. So the Juliana Furtado has been a 130 travel bike for quite a while. But on this latest version, they put 140 millimeter travel in the front, which I think is a great pairing. In fact, I owned a Santa Cruz 5010 probably about 5 years ago. That's the unisex version of this bike. And I was considering putting a 140 fork on it. So this bike still is, despite the fact that they've lengthened the rear end of this bike, it is still pretty easy to get it up off the ground. Now, other bikes that I've ridden in recent years, like my Ibis bikes, they tend to be a little more plush feeling in the suspension and have a lot more small bump compliance. And that's a real trade-off. I feel like the Julianas I've ridden have a little less small bump compliance than the Ibis bikes I've ridden, but they're also way more efficient. And I love climbing, especially technical climbing. So having a more efficient bike that's not going to squish into the suspension when I'm trying to get power, you know, that's something worth considering. Juliana offers several different build specs for this bike. This one is nice. It's my first time trying wireless SRAM axis shifting, which has been a lot of fun. It's got the reserve carbon wheels, some really nice i9 hubs. They come with great engagement, super important here. No dab. Whew. When I stand up, it's instant power, no sag into the suspension. I actually have had the chance to ride this for a few months, so it's nice. I've got a pretty good feel for it. This bike is still easy to get aloft, you know, on some little drops like that, trying to keep the front wheel up. So this trail is called Thunder Mountain. It's a nice little condensed slice of Sedona riding. A lot of slow speed tech, intermittent up and down. There's only a couple brief moments where you can actually get up to speed. Oh, thank you. That's nice of you, thanks. A lot of good, perfect little holes to stuff your wheel into in Sedona. And having a 29 up front really does help with that. I love this turn. Whee! Man, cameras never capture how difficult sections like that are. Up and over. Woo-woo! And it is nice having that 140 fork. I can be a little more aggressive, let it go a little more without worrying about hitting the bottom of my suspension hard. This is the most dramatically different Furtado that we've seen in quite a while. Even just to look at it, you can see the frame is different. The tubing style is a lot meatier. It's a lot more imposing looking. It also makes space for the glove box, that storage container. It's a beautiful bike. It definitely keeps with the Juliana aesthetic. I always love the colors. The Furtado has always been known for its playful, puckish attitude out on the trail. Very easy to get a loft and play off of little rocks and contours in the trail. But having a 29-inch wheel in the front really changes the personality of this bike. It takes it from a 17-year-old with a slight problem with authority to a 21-year-old with no concept of authority. It definitely gives it a more serious edge. Let's talk about some of the things that Juliana did to try and maintain that playful attitude of the bike despite that major change. So as they stretched and lengthened this bike out, they did extend the chainstay a little bit. Now, having a shorter chainstay is one of the things that can help a bike slice and cut tight and feel a little more playful. But they did extend that out a little bit, so it went on the medium from about 426 to about 433. So it is a little bit longer. I'm glad it's not any longer than that though. Now, as I've mentioned before, Juliana has a more progressive suspension. So as you get in to work into the travel, you feel that pressure amp up so that you can spring out of that and use that to your advantage as you're playing around on the trail. And it really does keep that. And I think it's owing partly maybe to the shock tunes that they use on these bikes, but also the VPP rear linkage also helps create that feel. So we do still get a lot of the playfulness on the rear end of the bike from that. In addition to the fact that having that smaller wheel does keep things cutting a little bit quicker and sharper, which feels really nice and responsive. Another really big thing that I think Juliana did to help keep this bike feeling playful is they brought the stack up and rose the front end of the bike up. It makes it a little bit easier to get the front end of the bike up as you're kind of hopping and playing around on the trail. When you're climbing, getting it onto ledges, it's a lot easier to do that. If you're dropping off of ledges, it's easier to keep that front end of the bike up. And so having a higher stack really helps with that. So I think they did a good job accounting for how some of the other more aggressive changes, like the bigger wheel in the front, like stretching this bike up, and making other adjustments in the bike to ensure that it would still have a playful attitude despite the burly new attitude up front. The high stack does take maybe your first 3 rides or so just to kind of get used to. If you do a lot of steep climbs, when you stand, you have to be a little more aggressive getting your body forward because the stack is higher. It just feels different if you're used to a lower stack. So it does take a little bit of time to adjust to, but once you get the hang of it, you actually really, really love it on those climbs, especially technical ones where you're having to pick up the front tire quite a bit. Another thing that's nice about that high stack is when you're coming down steeper sections, it does raise your body position up slightly. So you don't feel, it's a little bit less scary because you don't feel like you're diving down as much. So that is kind of a comforting feeling here in Sedona if I'm doing steep rock rolls. One thing I have heard a lot of people mention is that they are kind of sad that we lost the 27.5 front and rear setup on this bike. I do think that there is still a place in the world of mountain biking for a 130 travel bike with 27.5 front and rear. So I get what those people are saying, but I do think if you can look at the new Juliana Furtado in its own right, this bike is pretty rad at what it can do. Juliana has done a good job of trying to maintain a lot of the fun and playfulness that we love about this bike, but giving it that glow up with the 29er up front. So this bike is definitely more keen to haul downhill at higher speeds while still having a nice stable feel. I know you guys have heard how much I love the feel of Juliana's suspension. I love what a firm pedaling platform it is for climbing, that I stand up and the power transfer is instant. I don't lose a lot of power squatting into the suspension. So this is a lot of fun to climb on a bike like this. This bike's happy place is definitely the kind of trails where you are going to throw at least some moderate tech at it. A combination of blue square and black diamond trails, that's where this bike comes alive the most. But because it does have some lively suspension, you can still pepper in some green trails. I always like to encourage people to get the right bike for 80 to 90% of what they ride. So if you don't ride trails that are technical, or maybe you don't even live in a part of the country where there are technical trails, there could be better bikes to consider that are going to give you a little less bike to have to pedal around and feel even a little more playful on trails that don't have much tech to work with. But if you like to mess around, a little bit of rock, a little bit of route, a little bit of steep, a little bit of techie climb, I think this bike could be a really good fit for you. I think this bike is probably not right for you if you like a more plush ride with a lot of small bump compliance. And a lot of people who live in parts of the country where most of their climbs are smooth climbs and their real tech is on the downhill, sometimes bikes like that with more small bump compliance and can erase more of that stuff in the trail make a lot of sense. But I do feel like where I'm at, you really have to earn those descents, and we have a lot of technical climbing. So I actually prefer something that has a firmer pedaling platform, even though that means a little less small bump compliance. You get a little more trail feel, and it does give you a little more playful feel in the suspension. I think the 140 fork was a fantastic upgrade. There's something magical about 130 travel bikes, but to pair it with a 140 fork is really great because it still gives you a lot of explosive power in the climbs. But I do feel the difference having a 140 fork on this bike, hitting descents a little bit harder. There's some fun descents that I like to do. You have to do brutal climbs to get to them here in Sedona, but you can just fly downhill and there's lots of square edge hits. And a bike like this, ideal for that kind of stuff. Just as kind of an aside, this is the first bike I've ever tried SRAM wireless axis shifting on, and it's actually been really fun. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about it. I thought that the batteries weren't going to last very long and I would have to remember to like charge the battery after every ride, or I'd find myself up a creek. It's really not like that. These batteries last for a while and it's really easy to check them, but it's not one of those things where you're having to change the battery every ride. It's really every few rides for how I've been riding it over the last few months. Now, depending on which build spec you get with the Juliana Furtado, you may pay anywhere from about $5,300 up to around $10,000 if you're getting the X01 SRAM axis wireless shifting. So there are a lot of offerings in between. One thing that I think is a really big barrier for some people with Juliana is the price. And you know, that's okay. There are lots of different bike brands that specialize in lots of different things. And so it's okay if a Juliana isn't for everyone. On the other side of that though, I do think if you can afford to purchase a bike that gives you that premium ride experience, premium customer experience, you know, they're going to stock small parts on your bike for 10 years. If you buy a Juliana, you get free bearings for life. You have a warranty on your carbon frames. Granted, they have a fantastic reputation for their carbon frames. Juliana bikes are notorious for being quiet. They're not loud. You're not having cables and things clanking around. They're really quiet, tight builds. And they just pay a lot of attention to really fine details. And I talked about this when I unboxed this bike, but all the way down to little tiny details when you go to slip the wheel in to put the axle in. It just lines up so nicely. Some bikes you really have to fuss around with that to get it lined up well. So they put a lot of extra energy into engineering these bikes well and paying attention to the fine details. I'm really excited that we've got more women in the sport of mountain biking, more women getting on board every year, but I do think that there is still sometimes a bit of a mentality that can be a little bit of a turnoff for women who are trying to assimilate into the mountain biking community. You know, I've had people tell me when I had nice bikes, especially when I was starting out riding, like, oh, basically you're not good enough to ride a nice bike. And you know what? There's every kind of bike for every kind of person, every kind of rider. And if you can treat yourself to a nice bike, don't let anyone make you feel guilty for that. It's another thing that I appreciate about the women's brands like Juliana. You know, they don't make patronizingly feminine bikes. These are serious bikes, but they do have that brand and that platform that is something for female riders to rally around, to say, hey, we belong here too. So anyway, that is my review of the Juliana Furtado. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Feel free to hit me up in the comments and let me know if there are any other bikes that you would like me to review, or if you have questions about how this bike might stack up against some of the other bikes you guys have seen me ride. If you've enjoyed this video, check out some of these videos below because I think you might enjoy them too. Thanks so much for watching. Get dusty.